Today we are discussing benchmarking urban mobility, and it's just to remind you that also at the European level, in the transport white paper, there is an action on urban mobility plans which actually refers to the issue of urban mobility audits, a scoreboard for cities, but also, certification of the status of urban mobility policies in cities. And the Commission is also putting this issue forward in the consultation that is currently open on the urban transport actions within the transport white paper. And the question is then what role the EU should play in the take-up of benchmarking and auditing schemes for urban mobility. But it's also good to keep in mind for this session to think of which of the benchmarking practices or the evaluation or auditing practices that will be presented could be useful for your own local context. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Ivo, to announce them European questions. And now for the next 15 minutes, I give the floor to Giovanna Gyergyay. She is from the East Institute in Rome. She has a law degree, Master's European Studies in Warsaw. That's very good.
Hello, everybody. Okay, I will present Quest project that is about quality management tool for urban energy efficiency and sustainable transport. As Ivo said, is one of the projects that support benchmarking urban level, and there is different reference with projects that have been presented between yesterday and today, and also with the session before in this room. So I will quickly present aims that are to develop an audit method and a certifying process related to sustainable urban mobility. So while we have seen other schemes that were directed to certify or to support one single sector on urban mobility, what distinguishes Quest that is directed to the overall process of sustainable mobility. So it's thank you. So it's all about the process of adopting policy, implementing and monitoring. It's all the circle of sustainable mobility policy. And also referring to the presentation of Barcelona in SAMP, where we have seen square circle of European Union that became square when applied in a local context. We are looking at how cities are which are the process of the different cities in adopting SAMP and adopting policy measures, and how we can support cities committed to sustainable mobility. At the same time, the aims of Quest is to promote best practice exchange among European cities and create a network, a pool of experts and cities on the subject. As policy framework, we have as a reference both the adoption of Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan and also the Convent of Mayors. We have seen a movement of cities signing up the Convent of Mayors initiative, and also are now in the process of working for Sustainable Energy Action Plan. In this action plan, part of this refer to measure dedicated for energy efficiency in transport sector. So these are the legal and the policy reference for the project. At the same time, we build upon the other projects that have been studying the labeling and the certification process to create political support, but also public and media support, so to push forward sustainable mobility policy. The time frame of the project is, and also define the different steps that have been followed, is to develop, first of all, the Quest methodology that have been carried on from May 2011 to January 2012, and is made by consultants and research institutes. The second step have been the trials of this methodology in 6 partner cities that was ended in February 2012, and that has been really a good test. Us as ISIS have been testing the methodology in Padua. That is one of the partner cities, and we have provided comment on what could be made more friendly for the cities to use, what have been the strengths and which were the weakness. So the method have been reviewed, and now we are at the moment where the Quest method is applied in 43 cities among European countries. So I'm not able to present the full result because the methodology is currently applied. We have carried out the Quest methodology in San Benedetto del Tronto. Next week will be Treviso, and then in January the other cities. So they are partial results, and the same work is done by the other research institutes and consultancy in 10 European countries. The project will be finalized in November 2013, when there will be the final conference, and between June and November there will be national workshop and also cluster workshop on the basis of the the theme on which the cities are more interested in. The expected result of the project is the development of an audit method and a certification that is awarded to 49 cities in 14 EU countries. The engagement of these cities on improvement program on the basis of Quest action plan. So workshop, as I mentioned before, both at national level, at thematic level, and the network of cities and auditors. The long-term goal is a Quest Academy with a pool of experts able to apply and this method in more cities. So, as we've seen, there is 6 cities that they are partners. So I've been the one that on which the test method have been tested first, and I've provided comment on how to improve the methodology. The partner cities are Bath, Chomutov, Galve, Ghent, Padua, and San Sebastian. So it's quite different in different European countries, and this provides also a good insight on local and national legislation, how to apply European methodology in the different contexts, especially for what regard the previous experience. There are 2 networks of cities, Polis, our host, and Union of Baltic Cities, and there are 43 cities like followers in different countries that are at the moment, in which at the moment the Quest methodology is being applied. For the Italian cities, there is Pisa, Reggio Emilia, San Benedetto del Tronto, and Treviso that have volunteered to test this method, and they are going through the process of using it. These are the consultants and the research institution that are involved. So the coordinator of the project is Leihs and Partners from Netherlands, and ISIS, as I said, is the contact point and the auditor for Italy. The other countries involved are Sweden, Czech Republic, Germany, and Spain, Hungary, Slovenia, Romania, Belgium, France. So it's quite wide, the network of consultancy and cities that are engaged. Just found some slides of what we talk when we talk about Quest methodology. So what the aim, what have been the principle that the research institution and the consultants have been looking at drafting the methodology that was looking for something that was practical for the cities, a practical tool that will not require a comprehensive, extensive research. It's not aimed to build up a SAMP that requires 3 years, but it has to be a simple and friendly methodology to support the elaboration of SOMP, especially on the stakeholders' involvement and comparison on what we have done, how the mobility is perceived by the cities. We don't aim to make a comparison between cities. It's really, we take into consideration that there are some cities that are well advanced while some others are starting on mobility policy. So the methodology is declined to the different level of cities that are differentiated in starter, climber, and champions. And we really look for practical progress. So at the end, the action plan will contain long-term measures, but also short-term measures that could be easily applied to have some gain on sustainable mobility. As I said, it's based on national context. It's a common framework that then has to be through the national contact by the national auditors applied into the different context. Okay, the Quest audit method is divided in 11 steps. I will focus in 4 because they are the main, and you can look at the website where all the methodology is described. First of all, we have an audit. What is called audit is it aims at compiling a realistic picture of sustainable mobility planning and measures of the city. It's made mainly by a questionnaire and interview with the city representative. So then there is the self-assessment. That is the most engaging process for the city because it's the participation in a guided self-assessment process. It's a questionnaire that is sent to stakeholders identified by the cities and 2 meetings organized with the stakeholders. Then follow up with a meeting with the city representative, also to see which were the results. On the basis also of this process, the auditor drafted an action plan that contains mainly recommendations on possible improvement on the mobility. And then there is a certification awarded at the end of the project to the city that have participated and also have committed to apply some of the measures contained in the action plan. Just a snapshot on the self-assessment that for our experience was the part that require most of time and resource, and also for some cities was quite innovative, especially for starter cities on sustainable mobility, and also is linked with the involving the participation and engagement process that is often related both to SAMP and to Sustainable Energy Action Plan. So if the city participates in all this process, in the second step, in the self-assessment, we ask to identify stakeholders and guide them to find a composition of a group that is well-balanced between users and transport operators and city representatives. So there is a questionnaire that is similar for all the cities that is compiled by the different stakeholders. And then there are 2 meetings organized. One is called consensus meeting and is direct to have an agreement on the perception of mobility policy. So it's also linked on the perception of the citizen of what the city does in terms of mobility. And then a second meeting that is direct to identify where the city can easily improve, both in terms of process-related process and in terms of implementing measures and monitoring. This will form the material that is used to draft the action plan by the Quest auditor. What are the tools that have been developed so far by the project? Is a manual for the auditors, is a questionnaire, so direct to the city, is the self-assessment questionnaire direct to the stakeholders, is the action plan, and a city report guidelines. The benefit for the cities, and is the last one, is the city with this method are able to go through their mobility policy, identify the needs for improvement. There is an opportunity to create, deep and enlarge the partnership with the stakeholder groups. They are receiving tailor-made action plan and are assisted in bringing the proposal contained, the recommendation contained to political level and achieving approval of necessary action. So, and then there is all the part related to networking and exchange. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Giovanna.
Okay, this was a funny picture about conflict in mobility, because this is Italian cities where bike sharing and car user are not always...
Yeah. I saw it was a good picture also at the screen. Thank you, Giovanna. And now the second model we have that's presented by Anna Clark, coming from the Trivector Traffic company, and studies were at the University of Leeds. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. So I work for Trivector Traffic in Sweden, but you might guess from my name and my accent that I am not Swedish, just to make that clear, because a lot of people get confused by that. I'm going to talk about a very similar project to the Quest project. You can hear it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
A very similar project to the Quest project called Ecomobility Shift. It's funded under the same research funding, but we started a year earlier than Quest, and we finish in May 2013. And you'll see a lot of similar things between what we're doing and what Quest is doing as slightly different approaches. First of all, I need to tell you what ecomobility is. Why have we chosen to talk about ecomobility instead of sustainable mobility? The main reason for this was that the coordinator of the Ecomobility Shift project is ICLE World Secretariat, and they are in charge of an ecomobility initiative on an international level. And it's quite simply it's the same thing as we think about as sustainable mobility. We just have a different name for it. So you can replace ecomobility with sustainable mobility if you want. That's just a term that we use. It refers to the ability of any individual to travel, access opportunities, and reach destinations in an environmentally friendly, safe, and healthy way. And I mean, these are the kind of things that we've been talking about during the whole conference. I just bring in a definition of sustainable transport system, one that I've copied from the ELTIS guidelines here, about meeting society's economic, social, and environmental needs whilst minimizing undesirable impacts on economy, society, and the environment. And these I see as compatible, so that's the idea. So the idea is we have this quality management scheme. What are we doing? We're looking at a scheme that says, are you performing in sustainable urban mobility? Are you doing what you're planning to do? And we have created a scheme to look and see if you're actually doing that, and have someone come out from external and say and agree with you whether you're managing it or not. If there's one slide that you remember from my presentation, it's this one, not until I filled it in with all of the other bits. The Shift scheme in a nutshell, the essence of the Shift project is in this slide. What do? The Shift scheme assesses the level of ecomobility or sustainable mobility. Based on the assessment of sustainable mobility, it looks at plans for improvement, where you're performing well or not well. And we also have an external audit and certification scheme so that someone from outside can say, agree with your assessment or not verify whether it's correct in terms of the way that the Shift scheme is, and whether and that's where the benchmarking comes in this external audit. So that can be, it's designed on the European level. And just to bring the message even further across, here is the same thing in a sort of diagrammatic. We look at the assessment, and the idea is the assessment is done by the city themselves. They do their own assessment, and they identify their weaknesses and strengths in what they're doing, and they implement actions. The implementation of actions, that's not part of our scheme. We're looking at the assessment. And the audit is a separate bit. It's when someone external comes in and verifies whether the assessment is okay, and what level of sustainable mobility has been achieved, where the strengths and weaknesses are, and then can go on to be awarded with a label. So that's the scheme in a nutshell. Just remember that. You can go to sleep now, but I'd rather if you didn't. Why would you want to do this? Why would you have this assessment and audit scheme for ecomobility? Firstly, and this is something that we hear a lot, you want to have better, more sustainable transport systems. That's the ultimate aim. But in order to do that, in order to improve, to be better, you need to understand where you are. You need to understand where your strengths and weaknesses are. So that's the idea of the assessment. But it also gives you recognition, especially in the audit phase, of the work that you've done as people working in the city and also the city leaders in improving the quality of life for citizens. And also there's this benchmarking aspect, as the title of this session. This is an important aspect that you can, when you have a standardized system across Europe, you say, well, we're performing this well on this bit. How is another city in Europe doing? And the information is there. So it makes it easier to compare and learn from other cities when you have this aspect. How is it done? Well, quite obviously with indicators. We have a large number of qualitative and quantitative indicators. These are broken down into 3 categories. The enabler indicators, which look at how the city is working, the conditions for creating sustainable mobility, if you want. These include like how you work with public participation, the policy documents that exist, and we have a number of things there that need to be looked through, the enabler indicators. The transport systems and services is a second main group of indicators we have, and these are, if you want to have sustainable mobility, there are certain things you need to do well. Good cycling infrastructure, good walking infrastructure, good public transport, parking policy, a number of things in there that need to be working well, and so we've gathered them together as transport systems and services. And then, of course, there's not much point in doing something well if you don't have any results and impacts. And so we have indicators which look at these, for example, measurement of air quality or greenhouse gas emissions. The modal split is included in here, results and impacts as well. So we have these 3 sets of indicators, and as I say, they're both qualitative and quantitative. We want to have as many quantitative indicators as possible to make it as objective as possible to understand how the sustainable mobility is. But sometimes we need to have qualitative indicators as well. We have a total of 28 indicators, but we're currently going through a final revision, so they might decrease in number. But the indicators quite often include subcategories, and so there are lots of, so these 28 indicators can be seen as more indicators if you look at all of the subcategories. And the idea is that you score the indicators 1 to 5, each indicator. I'll just give you a quick example of one of our indicators. I'm afraid I'm not going to go through all of them because they're very complicated and it's a lot of information. I think it's too much now, but you can come and talk to me about if you want more in-depth information about indicators. We have written up descriptions of all of the indicators with a definition. Sorry, I think I use this for a Pecha Kucha presentation, this slide. We have the definitions of the indicators, why that particular indicator is interesting for ecomobility, the evidence that would need to be collected to score the indicator 1 to 5, and then some examples of scoring, what kind of things in there. It's also links to further information and information for a city that doesn't have any data on this indicator of how possibly they could collect it in the future and why that would be important. So our example here was personnel and resources, which looks at the level of staff resources available to implement a sustainable urban mobility plan in this case, or a similar document. And so, for example, a level 5 city would have a lot of resources, it would have a lot of financing for that. A lower level city would have maybe just some external financing, no fixed department working on ecomobility, that kind of thing. But all of that is every indicator has this in-depth description, and some of these indicator descriptions are several pages long, so you can go through that and understand how to score the indicators yourself. This is kind of as an aside to kind of bring it to discussions that are also going on here, the connection of ecomobility to SUMPs or sustainable urban mobility, and I've taken these from the SUMP guidelines. Now, these are the kind of the purpose of why you want the SUMP, ensuring accessibility, improving safety and security, reducing pollution, etc. And these, I would say, we've gathered them up in the results and impacts indicators that we have. We then have the how to achieve the results in the USUMP, and these, I would say, we've gathered in the enabler indicators, and the transport systems and service indicators are included in there. I just include that as an aside to kind of link together. But back to our scheme, that who assesses ecomobility? So who is it who decides the level of ecomobility? A working group in the city is formed, and we have a step-by-step guide which will go through all of the details about how best to gather the working group. The idea is that you would gather different experts with different competences who would evaluate different indicators, and they would come together and discuss the valuations together. And then you can include external people, for example, public transport operator or other external groups as well, perhaps for individual indicators, perhaps to join the working group. You can have subgroups of the working group, etc. But there's more information about that in our materials. An external advisor who's trained in the shift methodology can be used if wanted. So it's actually an exercise for the city themselves, but they can be guided along the process by someone who's already evaluated, done an assessment with the shift scheme, so to guide them along and explain about the indicators and how best to score them, etc. And the political level, we also advise that they're involved at some point, but probably not in the working group.
Anna, for 4 minutes.
4 minutes, thank you. The group will meet 3 to 4 times, and as I say, they will divide out tasks on who best collects the information on the indicators and come together and have consensus about the scoring of the indicators. The results of the assessment are drawn up in a Excel. You fill in all of the indicators with the scores, and then you have the different scores for the categories. It's all comes up automatically, the representation of the data for the different categories, so you can identify very clearly the weaknesses and strengths based on the indicator evaluations. An assessment report is completed in the own language of the city with details on the process, on how they scored the indicators, their strengths and weaknesses, and what they will work on in the future. Then comes the auditing, and as I you'll all remember this because I told you to remember this slide. The assessment end is what needs to be done, and the audit is an extra part that can be done if it's interested. The external auditor verifies the assessment. It includes to level the playing field across Europe, because you have a lot of different conditions in European cities. We have city profile factors that will take into account, for example, the competences of the city, if they don't have or do have competence of public transport, for example. Also takes into account factors for walking or cycling. If it's a very hilly, very rainy, cold city, then it might have less cycling, etc. So that levels the playing field, and I won't go into that in more detail. It's quite complicated, and the auditor may possibly rescore some of the assessment of the indicators the working group has done. The auditor will come with an audit report and recommendation to the ecomobility shift body on the value of the audit, and the value in the end is a percentage, because you fill in your Excel sheet and you get 85% or 45% or whatever. The feedback on the scheme, we've done pilots of the scheme, we've had questionnaires, we've discussed with external experts, and here are our pilot cities that we've had. In Burgas in Bulgaria, Miskolc in Hungary, Lund in Sweden, which is where I live, Os in the Netherlands, Turnhout in Belgium, and Dundee in Glasgow. And really briefly, what we found out from the feedback was that as a whole, the way of working in the system was good, and it was a nice way to work, and it was seemed as a good way to assess sustainable mobility. There are some problems with definition of indicators, obviously based on national context, and it's very difficult to have all of this information on all of the indicators. Ensuring objectivity is a problem. As I say, we've tried to have as many quantitative indicators as possible, but it can be quite difficult to ensure that the right score is given to a city in different contexts if it's a qualitative indicator. And so we have to think about ways to deal with that. The final steps of the project, we are doing the final changes of the scheme, mainly to do with the indicator definitions. We're writing our business plan, plans for the future. So we're interested if cities are interested in this scheme, or if they would like to know more about it. We can include that in the interest in our plan. And then we have a launch event in spring of 2013. If you want more information about that, please contact me. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I know it was a very short presentation of quite a complicated thing, so thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Also just in time. And now we have some time for questions to compare also the two models. And perhaps I start first. Is Giovanna has a question for Anna, and Anna has a question for Giovanna. Okay. Take the microphone.
Maybe one question is about the data collection, because indicators, and one problem that we had on compiling the questionnaire with cities, well, the quest focus on small, medium-sized cities, and also there are a lot of starter cities, so not advanced, but we had many problems on having data. So cities are not always, which are, or are old data, or are not collected in a similar way, so there is no way to present in a answering the question in a similar way, and sometimes they don't have resource to collect in a short time. So if you had problems with the availability of data,
yes. I think you're always going to have this problem with data. The way we decided to tackle it was in two ways. One, if there really is no data at all, then a score should be 0. And if there is similar data, you can come up with a good argument of why it should fit for a certain category in our indicators, then you can score an indicator. The idea is that having data is a really an important part, sort of monitoring what you're doing, evaluating what you're doing, is a very important part of progressing in achieving sustainable mobility. So in not having the data, it's also, you're going to get a lower score. But that, in a way, it's fair because, you know, cities which are collecting the data are doing better. It's a part of working in sustainable mobility. So that's how we tackled it. But will always be a problem, lack of data.
I see that the answer is content. Do you have a question to Giovanna? No.
No, not off the top of my head.
It's for the audience now. Is there somebody who wants a question about the two models? Go ahead. Present yourself first and then put the question.
Twan Moderschot from the city of The Hague. My question is, in terms of the recommendations, are they addressing the city's responsibilities, like providing infrastructure and services? Do they also address, maybe directly, the citizens in the issue of changing behavior?
Yeah, your question is to Giovanna or both? Oh, both.
No, the aim in Quest is also to involve citizens and to make them feel that sustainable mobility is not just an initiative of the cities. So there is some action actually that requires the involvement of the citizen or the public transport operator, or for example for especially the trade sector or the shoppers. So there have been some meetings where they were asked the commitment also of the different stakeholders. Also because in some action, the city itself is not the only one that can proceed. Going on.
Anna?
I have a similar response that stakeholders are invited to take part in evaluating the indicators, and that we have some guidelines about how best to do that. Whether the scheme looks directly at getting citizens to change their behavior themselves, I would say no, that the scheme looks more at what the city is doing rather than at communicating directly with citizens, but they can be involved in evaluating and understanding how the city itself can improve.
Okay. Thank you. Still one question, if any, nobody, then we continue with the two examples of, and first of all, the monitoring and evaluating the Italian program for urban sustainable mobility, and it is presented by Maurizio Tomasini, former president of Polis.
Long time ago.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, good morning. Let's say ISIS has been involved in this program launched and supported by the Ministry of Environment in cooperation with the Italian Association of Municipality. Indeed, Ms. Giovanna Rossi, that is the responsible for the mobility, the sustainable mobility and the ministry, and Francesco La Pietra, that it belongs to Untitled, should have been present here. Both of them apologize for being not with us. Giovanna especially wanted to be with us, but institutional responsibilities often conflict with the desires. Okay. The Ministry of Environment launched a program in order to promote the sustainability of the mobility in urban context, delivering through contribution up to 75%, something close to 240 million euro, addressing the proposals to be received on this 9 typology of intervention. You can immediately recognize how similar are they to Civitas measures. So that is already good. At a certain moment, all the process started in 2007. Took a long time, typical Italian, fortunately. But again, already at that time, when Civitas was fully into the second phase, it was received positively. Then they received a certain number of proposals, and I will tell you later, and you can see that obviously, and good enough, public transport, enhancement of public transport, improvement of them was the major part of the intervention proposed by the city. And also it's worth to highlight how cycling was very well received as a stimulus to try to change the mobility attitude and shares. Okay, the program was addressing mainly to what are officially or bureaucratically defined in Italy metropolitan areas. And you can list them. There is one that includes Firenze, Prato and Pistoia as a single metropolitan areas, and then the other one. By the way, they are not administratively functioning this way, even if there is a law that defines it. Obviously, metropolitan area should have, and that is one of the limits, should have, let's say, the scope in considering the mobility issue beyond the actual and current municipality limits, but unfortunately it's not still this way. Therefore, there are, let's say, some limitation in what I'm going to say. However, I was focused on those, so the most of the intervention that has been proposed come from the metropolitan areas, because indeed they were asked to have a package of the measures, the intervention, as in Civitas is required. But then also they wanted to propose and to stimulate smaller cities, asking them, give us at least one proposal where you feel that is crucial, that is on top of your necessity in order to proceed in improving municipality and improving mobility. Okay, then what was the purpose of the ministry doing this? Try to reduce the emission. That was the goal. But obviously, even if not explicitly mentioned at the very beginning, they want all to see the changes in mobility patterns. In parallel, they also wanted, once the intervention has been identified, screened, improved, and the financing delivered, they want to make a status, to assess the status of the mobility of the cities that were beneficiary. Okay. In order to assess the benefits and the impacts, obviously they wanted, that is quite straightforward to understand, they wanted an homogeneous set of values for the indicators that should have been selected. The weak point of the starting of the process was not setting up or requiring any particular typology for impacts evaluation methodology. So the city were asked, what are you aiming to in terms of reduction of emissions? Obviously some kind of computation were possible, but nothing structured. But at the end, you want something that allows to compare homogeneously the data in order to give to the ministry something that allows to understand how beneficial it has been, this activity, and mostly, at least is my hope, to build up a better policy for the future. Because of what I said before in terms of preparation of city to this effort of participating to the impact evaluation, it was necessary to require the minimum of data beyond the one that they were proposing, not always the right ones. Okay. Again, in order to be homogeneous, it has been developed an online tool that should allow the cities to enter the data according to a procedure, making then the index evaluation elaborated by this simple model in order to make sure that we have something that allows to have a higher degree of confidence in terms of comparability. Okay, so those are the indicators selected for the emission reduction, and those for the mobility behavior. You can see, I mean, almost all of you are quite familiar with the methodology of Maestro developed into Civitas demonstration project. It's a very limited number of it, but that is the purpose of having something without aiming to a too much ambitious evaluation process that couldn't be supported by the cities. Okay, now I will go very quickly through this screenshot that is the evaluation tool. The first page that is presented to the municipality for each individual intervention is an explanation. Then they have to make the ex-ante ex-post data entering, so they decide which one is the status. Then there are the explanation of the units of the different data that must be inputted, and then you will have for another typology of intervention, the specific data for indicator. At the end, they can get results online. Okay? So, I think in principle it's good. It's good because it allows cities, well, mostly the ministry, but even the city to recognize their intervention and to be addressed to the most appropriate way for inputting data. Now, about the quality of data is the big issue that we will discover once the process will be on. Okay, to assess the status of mobility, it has been decided to launch an online questionnaire for collecting data, and then to go into the statistical analysis of the data themselves at the very beginning. The questionnaire was a little bit complex, and as any complex questionnaire, the percentage of responses is limited. at least for the one that completed all the points, even if under this condition we could really make a negative statement because the city would have been paid to do something, so delivery data should have been that a major effort. Okay, how we try to assess? We focused on private mobility issue because everybody knows that the big problem is the level of mobility issue, the typology of travels, the typology of fleet. So let's try to focus on it and apply an approach that is typical of risk analysis to define a risk index. Those are the data that we asked on the questionnaire. So, too much ambitious. Okay, the risk index defined take into consideration the three elements, that is the exposition, vulnerability, and endangering, that are quite easily understood because the vulnerability is the population, the danger comes from the emissions, so on and so forth. What is the very simple model? If we had a very dense city in terms of inhabitants concentration, if we have a high number of daily trips, if those daily trips are made with a high share percentage by private vehicles and they go on long range trip, then obviously the level of risk in terms of high quantity of impacts in terms of pollutions, in terms of any kind of pollution, energy consumption, and even safety is quite high as a consequence of it. So, applying this, we then classify the cities, and we classify the cities according to the number of inhabitants. The radius of the bubble is obviously the risk quantitative. Rome is a strange case because unfortunately it has such a large area. Even if we reduce the area to a radius where the density of population is quite high, still gives something that goes a little bit beyond in terms of radius. But you can see how many travel per day are performed by the inhabitants. Okay, so this is mostly for the large cities, and so you can see that there are a situation where, according to the private, to the modal share, obviously the risk it's lower or higher. Okay, the same, it's for cities of intermediate size from 100,000 to 100,000, and again we can see that regardless of the number of the daily trips, if, as it is for many cities, the highest share of private car, it's really extreme, the risk is quite high. Okay, that is for the very small cities. It's interesting to see, for example, the last two, Spoleto and Aosta. Aosta is much larger than Spoleto, but in terms of the number of trips, they are quite similar, but the way how they are performed is quite different. Okay, and again we can say that to be small is not always very beautiful, because if you look at Bergamo, that is much smaller in terms of inhabitants of Messina, how higher is the risk? The absolute number must be taken very carefully. However, was, I think, useful to make comparison. And the same is for the smaller cities. Okay, what we are now attempting to do. Okay, great. We try to make a complementary approach to make the assessment going of at least for the cities that have been able to supply the necessary data to evaluate the, let's say, total of the external cost in order to see how they can be potentially reduced according to the intervention that are going to be implemented currently by the cities. So we go into the typical categories of the external cost. What we have, it's a model, simple model, where you have the typical data you need, the fleet composition, the emission factors, the values come from the manual approved and delivered by the Commission. Obviously, you always can question, I mean, how are they say available the data, how they are of quality and reliability enough. But I think that in terms of before, after, to make the differences can be taken as a methodology. So we do this, and then it's a typical flow that is exactly what I said before, to see the flow data, obviously, the kilometers traveled by mode. It's a data that is not always present. Then the vehicle composition. It's interesting because you can make also sensitivity analysis changing. I mean, you picture what it is, then, but you can make a little bit of sensitivity analysis changing, for example, the kilometers, the composition, the technology that it's in there. And that is what is currently underway. The interventions of the Fund for Sustainable Mobility of the Ministry is still under an implementation phase. Some cities already went through. I don't think it's the majority. So data collection, I mean, the inputting to this online model, it's at a very preliminary stage. So once we will get, and hopefully we will cooperate again with the ministry, we will get the data, we will try to apply the two methodology that we are one completed, the other one to carry out the assent of the state, to tend to see how the trends or the externalities are affected by the results of the intervention. And that is the end.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, after this Italian example, we go to the Netherlands, and there are two speakers. First of all, we have Jürgen de Haan. He's now on the floor. He's a project manager of KPVV Transport. And Wim Korver, the second speaker, is head of the research and development from Goudappel Koffen. To you the floor, Jürgen.
Okay, thank you.
About the sense of urgency.
Yes, I'm Jürgen de Haan, indeed, of KPVV. We are a transport knowledge resource center in the Netherlands. We are financed by all 4 levels of governments in the Netherlands. And we give them in return back information about traffic. We disseminate knowledge and we develop knowledge. I'm concerned with sustainable mobility, and the main question in this presentation is how sustainable is our municipality, because together with a colleague of me who's concerned with mobility management, we noticed that there is a lot of data in the Netherlands, and a lot of the information that you can get out of it doesn't reach the policymakers or even the governors doesn't know the data. So, for example, another colleague of me, he made a big poster with the regions in the Netherlands that shows how clean the buses are. And one region in the Netherlands turned out to be relatively very bad. They had a lot of pollution of their buses. And in that city, the city board was actually putting some questions about this, and it helps the city to clean their buses. So this was for us a sign that we just could do something more than just that poster, and do something more in giving information about this. But instead of a poster, we wanted to do something with the internet, and we want to do something which benchmark figures on municipality level. And after some research, it turned out that it was possible to use a simple weblog system. This is a screen dump of one of the dashboards, as we call it. So as you see, it's just made in Google Block, which is a free tool, so you can use it yourself if you want to do something similar. At the left column, you'll see RSS feeds, which means that every day, every hour, you see new information on that column. So it's just making use of a tool that is in the internet. The main part is the middle column, which is an analyze about a certain suspect. So this is in Dutch, but you will see CO2. So this is the dashboard about the greenhouse gas. And at the right column you see the contents, so you can read through the dashboard like in a book. There are different chapters and you can jump to it by the hyperlinks. And below the contents there are hyperlinks to the different editions. And also most of the dashboards contain data at municipal level. So we have now about 12 dashboards made. Concerning the targets of policy, we have dashboards concerning external cost, health, energy, accessibility, clean air and climate. And concerning the measures, we have dashboards concerning cycling, pedestrian, car sharing, filling points, and that kind of measures. Now the contents of the dashboard, the analysis mainly made by consultants who look to the data and make some more information out of it. And the dashboard about health is being made by consultant Houten Koffin. And Wim Korver of that consultancy will now tell you some more about it. And I hope it will go good, because it's not the latest version.
Okay. Oh.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Now, this here, first of all, about the design principles for the dashboard. Those are used for all dashboards. First of all, it's important to get a message across, so there are popular headlines and a very good punchline. The texts themselves are mostly quite short. A lot of usage of maps, figures, tables, and text as short as possible. Important every time is to recognize that you can't compare every city. There are large cities, small cities. You saw it also in the example of Italy. So several times we are making a distinction between the urbanization and regional levels. We make sometimes a list of best or worst municipalities, or anyway, those municipalities which have a lot of possibilities to improve themselves. Very important that also the underlying data is given, that for every municipality can look up what the data is which is used. And of course, we use as much as possible all kind of hyperlinks to relevant literature and other websites, and also the RSS feeds. Now, some example of popular headlines. E-bike use could lead to 20% more bicycle use. That's a typical, even in the Netherlands, there are still possibilities to increase the bicycle use, especially for the more longer distances. Driving a car, worse than smoking. If you aggregate all negative impacts of a car, including traffic safety, then you can say that it's almost as worse as smoking is. Transport is the major source of CO2 emission within 40% of the municipalities. And another one, the number of teleworkers tripled in the last 7 years in the Netherlands. Now there are more, but these give some information, some feeling about what kind of messages we try to get across. This is indeed an older version, because in the newer version there was an English text on the left-hand side. But what you see over here is a map of the Netherlands on the municipality levels of the number of people killed in transport, and then it's calculated per 1 billion kilometers. So it's not the number of people killed, but it's the risk factor. And what you see over here, that there are large differences between the different municipalities. And the red ones are the one where the risk factor is the highest. And what you see that it's mostly in more rural areas that the risk factor for traffic safety is quite high. And in the largest cities you can see that it is much lower. And those are the more green ones. That's a pity, because in the good version it was in English, but what you see over here is the urbanization level. On the left-hand side, the number 1, that's a very high density, cities like Amsterdam, Rotterdam and so on. And on the score with the number 5 are the more rural areas. And what you see over here, it's the share of traffic and transport in total CO2 emissions. And what you see that is in when the densities are higher, the share of transport is lower. So the other way, if the more rural areas, the importance or the total share of CO2, transport-related CO2 emissions is much higher. And at the right-hand column, you can also see it if it's calculated in the emissions per person. But of course, that's the same information then. What you see over here is the exposure of small particles for 2011. It's a prognosis because it's an older map. I think one of these weeks the figures will come public what the real situation was. But here you see it for 2011, and what you see over here, now it's not so good to see anyway. But the darker blue ones are where the situation is worse, and the lighter blue ones where it is better. That it is the larger cities and especially the southeast of the Netherlands where the levels on small particles are quite high. Example of best and worst municipalities. This is a figure on the new car sales of alternative fuel cars on a municipality level. So you can see that in certain cities there are much higher car sales for alternative fuels than in other ones. And here's something about more explanatory factors. What you see over here is on the IS is the lack of exercise of people, and on the XS is the time people use their bicycle. And what you can see over here that as people use the bike more, then the lack of exercise decreases. So the health situation increases. And this is then based on figures on a regional level. It's not possible to have it on a municipal level, but it's quite clear that there's a quite good correlation there. And now Jürgen will go on with the evaluation of the dashboard.
Changing of voice.
Okay, so the last sheets are about evaluation, but first also the communication, because it is the dashboard is just some kind of dashboard, some kind of website, but we also published it, just like we publish paper publications. And therefore we sent some email alerts to a group of about 2,000 people that are interested in sustainable or smart mobility. We try to make about every month a new edition, and we also put it on our homepage, and also put some questions about the subject of the dashboard in the different LinkedIn groups or other social media groups. So about 4 groups on the internet about discussions, and we put a discussion in it about the subject of the new dashboard. So this all together are actions we take when there is a new dashboard. And we also made, after 5 dashboards, a questionnaire. And about almost 100 people answered the questionnaire. And it turned out that 2/3 of the visitors of the dashboard were people working in the transport department, but also people working in environmental and in the spatial planning department look to the dashboard. And the most important is the green sentence that says that 44% of the respondents say that the dashboard actually helped them in working more on sustainability. So that was one of the most important things, is that it really had some outcome that you give this information. Okay. Yes. This is a sheet that is really easy to make if you use Google Block, because it is a statistic that is made by Google Analytics. The above line you see for the last 2 years the dashboard about car sharing. So you see that about in July 2011 the dashboard was launched. You see a big about 200 visitors that at the day that it was launched. And also in July 2012 and October 2012 you see that there were quite some visitors, because we had an update then of the dashboard. And the line below you see the summary of all the 12 dashboards. So every peak in the line you see there is a publication of the dashboard. And it turned out that in total more than 10,000 people look to the dashboard. That will be a bit less, because if you look to your computer or to your smartphone you will be 2 different people, but there are quite some people visiting the website. So this altogether resulted in a conclusion that we are going to continue to make another series of dashboards, because it's a good way to inform the people, and they use the data to make more sustainable and more smart policy. So I think I will end with this sheet.
Yeah, thank you very much.